What is up, guys? Welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. Today I want to talk to you about prioritizing your habitat improvements on your land. Now, a lot of you are probably brand new at this or haven't been doing it for very long. You came onto YouTube here, you learned about all of the great things this community has to offer, the food plots, the mock scrapes, the water holes, the travel corridors, hinge cutting, red osier dogwood, all of the things, right? Well, what should you work on first? Because we all don't have unlimited time and resources to just overhaul our entire property before hunting season this year. And right now it's spring, you're probably eager to get out there and get started, but what should you focus on first? So the first thing you definitely want to focus on are your food plots. All other habitat improvements relate to those food plots. So you want to make sure that those are the first thing you focus on. Now, there's a few things to consider before putting in your food plots. You need to consider where they go on your property. And to jump to number 2 quickly, you need to consider your hunter access before putting in your food plots. So to use an extremely obviously bad example, you would not want to have, say, a 40-acre square with a road on one side of it and put all of your food plots right along that road, because how are you going to access your property without walking through your food plots? So obviously you need to consider the overall design of your property before you put in your food plots, but you specifically need to figure out how you're going to access those food plots or access the areas leading into and out of those food plots to hunt your property before actually putting the time and effort into building those food plots. But you do want to put the food plots in first, because like I said, everything else is going to relate to that food source. Now, we should probably talk about how much food you should put in. So let's just say again, if you have 40 acres, you're going to want around 2 acres of food per 40 acres of property. But do not put in a big 2-acre food plot in the middle of that property. Now, it might be easy to confuse food plots with ag fields, but they are not the same thing. Deer relate to them at different times of the day, and they treat them as separate food sources. So you don't want your food plots to be in the shape of an ag field, like a big square or rectangle. You want them to be more in the shape of like an elongated or widened out trail that has a bend in it so that deer can't actually see the whole plot while they're on the plot. But you also don't want just one big 2-acre food plot. If you were going to put in 2 acres of food per 40 acres of property, I would recommend putting in at least 4 half-acre food plots that are spread around the property in lieu of one big one in the middle of it somewhere. And this is for a lot of reasons. One, deer do not like each other. I know that might sound weird, but like deer herd up in their own little family groups. You'll get different doe family groups, and bucks will be in their bachelor groups and whatever. And during the rut, just throw all that out the window because they're all running around crazy anyway. But those individual little family groups or bachelor groups don't like to interact with each other for the majority of the year. So if you can put one group on this food plot over here and one on this food plot and one on this food plot and so on, and spread them out, that's going to be a lot better for your deer herd in your area. And you're going to find that you can pack a lot more deer on a much smaller area than if you try to attract them all to one big food plot on your property. So, okay, I touched on it a little bit, but you want your food plots to be in the shape of, like, say, a boomerang, an elbow, a kidney shape, something like that. You want to sort of use those food plots to guide deer where you want them to go. So think of the ends of that curve as the way that the deer are going to come in or leave your food plot. Deer don't just like come to a food plot and feed on it like they would, say, a corn pile or a feeder, something that you might be more familiar with if you're allowed to bait in your area. They sort of graze through it. So they keep, taking slow step by step as they graze through the food plot, and eventually will graze theirself off the edge. All right, so once you have those food plots in and they're shaped accordingly, so you can kind of let deer graze through your property and you kind of take them and then send them off the way you want them on your property to another attraction, maybe another food plot on your property. The next thing you want to focus on when in spending your time and money on your property is your hunter access. So we talked about thinking of your hunter access. You now actually want to work on your hunter access. You want to make sure that that hunter access is open in an open area that the deer aren't going to be. The deer stick to the thickest part of the woods, so make sure your hunter access does not go through that thickest part of the woods, that it comes off of a ag field edge, goes through some open hardwoods, whatever you need to do comes off the edge of a road, anywhere that you can get onto your property without having to bust through the thickest parts of your property where your habitat improvements are, the better. So that brings us then to screening. Now you want to screen your hunter access, but also your food plots. So what you might have happen is you'll have these food plots, you'll put them in, you'll put cameras on them, and you'll find that deer are coming to them and they're attracting them, but they're coming at night and they're feeding on them at night. Well, the problem you're having is the deer do not feel safe and secure to come onto your food plots during the daylight. You fix this by screening them. Deer want to feel like they're in a safe, secure little bubble while they're on your food plots. So in order to get them there during the daylight, they want to feel like they cannot be seen by anything in the surrounding area, because they do feel vulnerable. They put their head down to eat. They're not on constant alert while they're feeding. They want that security, that cover around that food source in order to get them there during the daylight. So, all right, you screened your food plots, you screened your hunter access. They cannot see you coming in on that hunter access from that food plot or from other attractions in the area. The next thing we need to talk about are mock scrapes, water holes, and travel corridors. So how are we going to start connecting these food plots or these attractions on your property? Well, we'd want to make travel corridors that go between them. And all a travel corridor is just a man-made deer trail. Deer are very efficient creatures, and they will choose the path of least resistance through the woods if you give it to them. Now, it may be the case that you're in some open hardwoods and everything's open and they can go wherever they want. Well, that's where stuff like hinge cutting comes into your favor, so you can start to put some cover on the ground in those big hardwoods to make them have to go where you want to go. And I know recently on social media there's been some controversy about hinge cutting. Now, hinge cutting is a very important and effective tool when it is required. Now, the thing is that it is not required on the majority of properties, and I think that just sums up the debate altogether. So where it's required, very useful. Where it's not required is most properties. So in that situation, you would create travel corridors through your hinge cuts so that the deer are now moving where you want them to move. If you just have thick cover naturally, you would create those travel corridors through that thick cover. You don't want them to just be like a straight shooting lane though. And we can talk about shooting lanes too. I do not recommend shooting lanes. Bucks will avoid them at all costs. They do not like a big straight opening in the woods. They will go all the way to the end of it and cross where there's cover. So with travel corridors, you want them to zig and zag through the woods because, like I said, deer will avoid them if you make this big, long, straight opening in the woods. They do not like the idea of stepping out and being able to see really far in both directions. So you use those travel corridors to attach your attraction. So like I said, if you put in 4 half-acre food plots, you would connect those food plots, but you can sweeten up those travel corridors with mock scrapes and water holes. And now if you guys are kind of lost and you don't know what all of these things are, go check out my library of videos on my channel. I do explain all of these things in more detail on my channel. So all right, you've connected your food sources, you've sweetened up your attractions with these other things. Now what? Well, now we need to start worrying about bedding and cover. So these travel corridors and attractions can also lead to bedding and cover. And so bedding and cover is sort of the last thing you want to worry about, because the deer will use the natural bedding and cover that is in the area to relate to these other things. But you need them to start relating to these other things before you worried about bedding and cover, because if you were to just put in bedding but there's no food nearby, well, they're not going to use that bedding. So it would be a waste of time and energy of putting in the bedding first. So once you start putting in this bedding, I prefer doing it in layers or in pockets. So I'm not saying that just convert the remaining part of your property into thick cover, although for certain situations that may be a good thing to do. But what you really want to do is put in just pockets of cover that relate to your food plots, because deer don't actually all bed down together. Like I said earlier, they don't actually like each other. Those groups tend to try to avoid each other if they can. So if you can put pockets of cover, those groups of deer will bed down in separate pockets so that they're not on top of each other. Again, you'll be able to put more deer into a smaller area if you do this. And so the does and fawns are going to bed down as close to that food source as they can. Then in that next layer after that, that's where your intermediate bucks are going to bed down, and that next layer is where your mature bucks are going to bed down. So a lot of times people put in a food source, and like I said, you were probably getting those nocturnal pictures, but then you put screening up, and then you started getting more daytime pictures. But it might be that it was the does and fawns you were seeing, and those bucks still weren't getting there, especially those mature bucks were not getting there until after dark. Well, that means that that layer of bedding, that third layer of bedding that those mature bucks are bedded in, are so far away that they just didn't have time to travel the distance required to get to your food source before it got dark out that day. So in creating more layers of bedding closer to the food source, you will get those mature bucks to bed down closer to your food sources, and you're gonna have a much greater chance at seeing them before dark. If you guys feel like you're getting some value out of this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more videos like this. So just a quick overview, the way I like to look at this is everything is dependent on that food source. So you kind of build the food source first, and then you build out the attractions from that food source. So it's food source, you got to consider that hunter access. You always have to have that in the back of your mind. You screen that food source, that's immediately on the edge of the food source. You're putting in these travel corridors with other things to sweeten them up, like the mock scrapes and the water holes. Those are leading directly off of those edges of that elbow shape or whatever of your food plots, and then those are going to head to either bedding and cover or other food plots. So you sort of start at that food plot and just work your way out on your property, and that is the best way to prioritize your time and money on your property, because we all don't have time to do all of these improvements in 1 year or several years. But in doing it this way, you're getting your biggest bang for your buck up front, and you're not wasting your time doing something like creating bedding when you don't even have any food for them to relate to. So this is the best way to get success on your land in those early years before you're able to completely develop your entire habitat improvement plan. All right, guys, I hope this helps. I hope this really helps you prioritize your time and your money in the deer woods this year and beyond. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.